thank you to everyone who is helping us with our transcripts. You're doing a great job helping us make sure they are published together with the podcast. If you'd also like to help out with publishing, just email us at hey@uxpodcast.com. That's Hey or HEJ.
UX Podcast episode 259.
Hello, I'm Pat Axbom.
And I'm James Roy Lawson.
And this is UX Podcast. We're in Stockholm, Sweden, and you're listening in 198 countries and territories in the world, from Benin to Montenegro.
Rishma Hansel is a UX designer working with implementing technology-based learning strategies in language education in Tokyo, Japan. She's written some really enlightening and interesting articles on Japanese UX and web design.
Originally from Trinidad and Tobago, Rishma is not herself from Japan, but has over the last 5 years been immersing herself in the culture and language, making her a suitable mediator for us to begin to dip our toes in the uniqueness that is Japanese design.
Yep, and stay tuned after our chat with Rishma for our post-interview thoughts and reflections. I was reflecting on the fact that is it maybe with us who live in and work in countries with a Roman alphabet, is that kind of something that we get lost in that world of Roman alphabet and we kind of push away and we kind of don't really understand all these things that are in different alphabets. But I don't really know if that's maybe just how it is with that lens that we have from where we are, because that's where I live and work. But how does, so to me, Japanese design and websites look very different. How does it look from your side?
So I think one of the biggest things is just how much information you can receive in a very short number of characters. So in Japan, they use 3 types of scripts. So kanji, which comes from like the Chinese traditional characters. And those are more like picture graphs that contain so much information in just one character. And then there's the hiragana and katakana, which are the Japanese alphabet forms that make their own set of words. And when you put all of that together on a website, you can share so much information. Whereas I feel if you're looking at a website in English, you have, a bold typeset to help, pinpoint certain information. You have really stylized text designs that kind of give you the feel of what maybe this article is about or what this brand is about. But looking at it with the eyes of someone who can read and understand Japanese characters, it's more the information that you can get with all of those various alphabets combined into one. So
I hadn't realised at all that the information density was such a thing. Because, I mean, you're saying that these 3 different sets of characters are using together. Is the Roman alphabet used on top of those 3 as well?
No. In traditional, like in the Japanese newsprints, you would rarely ever see the English alphabet. It's always, they use the katakana when they're writing foreign words in Japanese. So,
right, okay.
Yeah. So it's like some of them even sound very English. So in English, we would say hamburger, and the Japanese alphabet would say hamburger. So you can pronounce it using the Japanese phonetic. Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah. Okay. So there's not even a need to use English words.
No. But branding, of course, I guess, is still right kind of company brands and things.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. But so when we're looking at if we're looking at a Japanese website, then where some of the things that maybe we would perceive as headlines are maybe even more like sentences, I guess, to us.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes. And there's something really interesting about how much information a Japanese person wants on a website, which for me it kind of shifted when I moved to Japan and started to realize, okay, they want to know a lot of things up front. The customer journey is really different. In Japan, they want you to disclose as much product information from the get-go. Like as soon as you open that gate, let me know, what am I getting into? What are the materials? Who designs this? Where does it come from? Whereas I feel in the West, we're very much, a visual, like we want to see those pretty images, like scroll through maybe those 3D renderings where you can rotate it. And we want that before we go into things like product reviews and the manufacturer, stuff like that.
That's really interesting. But that also means that if there is more information density, we don't always catch on to that. So there's actually more space to have that information up front as well.
Yeah. Some would argue, because when I look at a site, I'm like, okay, there doesn't need to be that much stuff going on. But at the same time, it's what the user feels is most helpful for them when making a purchasing decision.
For me, I just have to go back to that, because something that blew my mind was that there's no bold, there's no italics.
Yeah.
And that made me wonder about fonts, because font choice is really important in Western design. And you were talking about how you can actually design the different letters in different ways. But how would that work? Because you couldn't go, do I choose a sans serif font or a serif font? Because if you add serifs, it's not the same letter anymore.
Yeah. There are different ways that you can style the Japanese letters. In the same way that we might choose a different typeface, or maybe increase the size of it rather than make it bold. But on my Medium article, I use the example of the Apple website. So they do the similar stylistic elements, just using the Japanese text. And the weight of the text is probably what people are looking at more so than the stylistic element, because some of those traditional, like some of the old Japanese bars here, for example, use really traditional kind of calligraphy style writing that I've asked my Japanese friends, and they can't read it. It's so old school, they don't even know what it means, but it's cool, and it signals to the patrons that, okay, this bar serves, a certain type of alcohol geared towards a certain type of crowd. So in that way, I think there are similar type styles, just executed differently.
You mentioned the Medium article that you wrote there, and in that as well, you've talked about or refer to the contrast between that simplicity of Japanese design, product design. We've got the clean looking things with nice colours and very stylized and calming almost. And then when you kind of land on a Japanese website, it's kind of like you've just been dumped in the middle of Tokyo, and you're going, oh, what? Which again feels like that's just a fascinating paradox with my European eyes on it.
That's how I felt when I got off the plane, because you hear about Japan as being, or in the media, in movies, you see it as this very futuristic, this alternate reality world where there are robots and everything's very high tech. But the backdrop of that is a very traditional culture, steeped in a lot of these values of like harmony, and you have like Zen Buddhism, and watching those two realities play out simultaneously is that exact experience of going into Muji and buying this very sleek, there's no text written on these packaging at all. It's so clean, but you go onto a website and it's every word in the universe that is presented to you at the same time. But it works, I think. I think the people that are living here in Japan, and they talk about the age group, the age demographic, like there's a large percentage of their online users are over 60. And in that way, they try not to change too much about what you experience online, on the web, on their apps. They try to keep that, as formulaic as possible, so people can always find the information that they need that's relevant to them.
Oh, that's really interesting. So I think a lot of us will be aware of the fact that Japan has an aging demographic. It's one of those things that gets thrown out in articles and media quite often. But are organisations themselves very aware and very respectful of that aging demographic? So when you're doing design in Japan, is that something that you really are? It's an active decision, active conversation about not changing too much because you have respect for the ones who've been with the design a long time.
Oh yeah, certainly. That's something that is on the forefront of people's minds because that's the user that we have to think about when designing for them. And it's almost as though they try not to change too much too quickly. It is a very slow, very progressive way of doing design, especially online design here, with a lot of their apps and websites. It's very small changes that you see happening incrementally over time. You would rarely ever see a brand totally redo their entire interface or their entire online branding and it being totally different when you look at it. I think that's, in part to the fact that a lot of people who are using these websites go to it expecting a certain thing. In the same way with products and the retail experience in Japan, you go into a store expecting it to work in a particular way. And when it doesn't, there are so many other places you can turn to for that information.
That sounds actually that you have a more focus on usability in Japan than my experience is in most Western countries, where you do change a lot. And I do lots of talks about accessibility, and one part of that is the constant change of payment systems and how you buy tickets on the bus, and everything is changing so fast. And so what you're saying is that it's actually part of the culture to not change that fast.
Yes. And for some people, like when I first arrived, I found it a little bit frustrating. I remember the first time someone asked me to use a fax machine, I was very upset. I was like, what? I was like, excuse you? I'm like, hold on, let me go back to the 90s real quick. But that's that's the thing. That's what they like. A lot of those systems are still in place. And they phase out, but it takes quite a few years before that happens. And in that time, you have the old and the new coexisting. So people are learning and adapting they're adapting better, but at a slower rate, I would say. So I've used a lot of those kind of like online systems. When I use the subway, it is so accessible. When I came to Japan, I didn't speak any Japanese, nothing. I only had pictures and colors and my UX background to figure things out. And it worked really well, really, really well. So that's just a sign that usability is working.
I guess you get it gives you space to consider maybe the details. I mean, going back to what we said about like simplicity and some of the small details of things, that when you're rushing to do big changes, as Per said, we seem to still a lot of the time do these massive changes, excluding maybe Amazon, who've been one of the ones that have been, very Japanese in their approach with keeping a very similar website for an awful long time. But as a designer, then, do you feel that you do get kind of like more space to breathe and to kind of tinker, I guess, or tweak the designs than have to do a kind of like 1,000 wireframes for an entire new redesign?
Yes, I definitely think so. There's no ever massive overhaul of something. We are not taking everything apart and putting it back together again and making it new. It is one or two things that we look at a time, and how we can improve that, how we can make that better. And I think with that kind of laser focus on one particular function or aspect of a product or service, that's how Japan seems to be excelling so much, globally, with their innovation in tech and in AI and in services. It's looking at what isn't working so great or what can work better and focusing on that, fixing that before jumping into the next thing, or redoing everything and then looking at what went wrong, how we can make it better, like that. On another note as well, I find that approach has done well for customer loyalty. There's a lot of brand loyalty in Japan. People really, you choose a brand, whether it be anything from milk to shoes to a certain piece of tech, and you stick with that for the rest of your life. So, yeah, and I think that loyalty comes a lot to where the customer just feels connected and feels like they're growing with the brand rather than the brand growing so fast that they can't catch up with it.
Right. So the familiarity that they can build with something that is stable,
yes,
creates a stronger attachment than something that becomes unrecognizable on a regular basis.
Yeah, pretty much. And with Japanese people having, I think, one of the longest age groups. Like, I mean, I know quite a number of centenarians here. So if you are loyal to a brand, yes, I want you to be loyal for 100 years and more.
Yeah. So here in Sweden, we have a lot of older people as well. Or at least people live a long time in Sweden, and I'm not sure though if we can make the same analogy between Sweden and Japan in that sense.
No, not at all. Exactly. That's so fascinating to hear.
Well,
but it's also because we change more here. So, I mean, we can't really test it. Because, even our public sector companies, they change logos and they rebrand and they're totally different and they have this tone of voice and it changes. So it's much harder to be loyal, of course, then. Something I picked up on also is what I would call a sense of humor, but you didn't call it that in your article because I loved the frogs. So the frog-shaped construction signs. And that was also so enlightening to me because, in most countries, the construction signs or even the roadblocks would be just big blobs of concrete. But what I was seeing in your article is that they were frog-shaped and green.
And cute.
And fun to look at. Yes.
To
me, is like, that is what I get the sense of. I get all these impressions and they make me feel good. And there's a sense of humor there.
Yeah, I like that you call it a sense of humor. I didn't think about it like that, but yeah, a lot of it is really funny. It does make me chuckle. Do you use the word kawaii in Sweden? Like when you talk about things that are very, very cute, of the like.
My daughter probably would, but she's really into Japanese culture just now. But I wouldn't. You
wouldn't. You wouldn't say, "Oh, that's so kawaii."
No, I wouldn't.
Well, yeah. So kawaii is Japan's word for cute, but it is a lifestyle, which I had to learn about the hard way because I thought it was reserved for children, and I thought it was only to be used in ways that were purely aesthetic. But then you get frog construction signs, and you realize that you can be a construction worker and you can be kawaii, and it is it just ranges. So many different things in Japan, but it's more about making people feel relaxed, making something feel friendly and inviting and familiar, and it's used so effectively in situations where you are scared or anxious or confused. With 30 million people in Japan and you are on a commute and something goes wrong, that will ruin the rest of your day. But seeing little frog signs or, when you go to a doctor's office and there are cute, friendly, soft-looking creatures on the forms or design like little icons that are cute, it does psychologically make you feel calm.
So the thing there, though, I guess, is that Japan has managed to retain that acceptance of playfulness and cuteness into adulthood. So the culture allows for that. So we can't. And if we wanted to apply this in the UK, for example, then we couldn't just suddenly start rolling out cuteness. I presume.
But couldn't you? I would love. You would have small kittens on your health declaration forms at the doctors. Lots of people would love that.
Yeah, but I think at the same time, a lot of people would be kind of putting on the old stiff British upper lip and saying, that's not very British. Now I'm being stereotypical about my own country, but or one of my own countries. But it's, I think it's interesting to look at these cultural aspects that are so deeply rooted in Japan, but I think we maybe would have to be careful about how you could apply them and roll them out in other cultures, because that's not something you can do with just releasing a new version of a website or an app or something. You'd have to work on it for decades probably to embody that cultural aspect of it all.
Yeah, I remember I had a conversation with my Japanese friend, and I asked if she ever watched E.T., and she said no, E.T. is terrifying. I'm like, what do you mean? A lot of people think, he's so cute, such a cute, friendly alien. And she said to me, she was like, oh, I've been living in Japan for so long. My standard for cuteness is very high, and E.T. is disturbing. So.
That's such a great example. Wow.
Says so much about where we are on the scale, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I started showing her other things. I'm like, look at this little, like, oh, look at a gremlin. Is it cute? Yeah. So they have a really different scale for cuteness, I think, than the rest of the world.
Something I've heard is that, yes, the cuteness seems to last into adulthood, but with the language, there's a different thing, isn't there? Isn't the language used by children a bit more distinct from the language used by adults? It's kind of with the complexity and simplicity and things. Yes,
yeah. And Japan has a hierarchy system with their language, so there are levels to politeness in the language. And in terms of UX, like when we have to write text for an app, we have to use the most polite because we're talking to our users, our customers. They pay the bills, so we're not going to refer to them informally. It's just that
you have to build in respect because you have to show respect for your customer.
Exactly, yes. And there's even something as well, when you take the bus, there's a tiny little bus stop bell that you ring, and the amount of text they squeeze into that tiny bus stop bell is fantastic, because it's the polite form of like, please, dear customer, if you press this bell, the bus will stop for you. Thank you for riding with us. Whereas in other countries, it just says stop. It's just STOP. Stop.
It's so lovely, though. I mean, it makes you think of all these things that we take for granted, and you realize it's so rude. We are being so rude to each other every day while they are being polite.
Yeah. One of my Japanese teachers made the comment. She was like, I apologize for something. She's like, no. You are disrespectful by nature, because it's just like in English. I don't have the, I wouldn't know, And
wow.
She's like, it's just your nature. There's thank you. There's thank you very much. And there's, thank you very, very much. But,
That's it.
Yeah.
But, okay, so I mean, there's bound to be, when we talk about different cultures, you always have to be careful. And I think, you were touching upon it. You were being prejudiced about your own country, James. But I think when I started out in web design, I got went to all these seminars where people were talking about colors and what colors meant in different countries. And some were saying, well, in Asia, white means death. And so don't use a lot of white. And I always thought that was really stupid because, so you have a white piece of paper and you write on it and you give it to someone and that means death? No, it doesn't. So, the advice being given, of course, was really weird and strange back then. So, but what types of myths have you come across that just aren't true for Japan?
About design or about...
Yeah, can be design, can be anything really, but myths or prejudice or things that you really strike you as naive.
I think probably it has to do a lot with that kawaii aspect of things. I think for me, I definitely underestimated how powerful a tool it was. So when I saw things that were kawaii and cute in Japanese design, I really thought that was only for a certain subset of the population. I didn't realize what a powerful emotional design tool that was. And I didn't realize that you can roll out cuteness across the board, from the private sector to, government institutions, and how key it was in helping people relate to certain sets of information. Japan has a lot of earthquakes, as you know, and only yesterday was the anniversary of the massive 2011 earthquake. And when I got my evacuation manual and guides, all of those things could be potentially very, very terrifying for someone who comes from a country where I don't have to worry about major earthquakes. But the way in which all of that information was presented was using those colors and patterns and images and graphics and cartoons and illustrations and anime styled, cover your head, put on your helmet, you'll be okay. And I thought for a moment, yeah, I can do this. I'll be okay. And now I've come to just grow to love how that can be such a powerful tool.
So if you're a designer being dropped into Japan, where do you start? What's your last piece of advice for anyone? What to learn more about?
I would start by spending at least, your first week in Japan observing. Sit on the train, sit in a restaurant, and just watch. Japan, Tokyo especially, is a playground for UX designers. You can observe, you can play with different machinery and technology and enjoy and watch how people of all ages interact with products, down to, buying things in the supermarket, opening packages at convenience stores. Just be an observer. And I think you learn a lot that way.
I'm really looking forward to going.
Me as well.
Yeah. Hopefully it'll happen soon. When things open up again and allow us to travel, then I'll be looking forward to observing and taking in all of the cuteness and complexity and fascination of Tokyo and Japan.
If I'm here, give me a call. I'll give you a grand tour of the city.
We will do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, Rishma.
Thank you for having me.
So one thing there is I've just learnt a whole load of words beginning with K. Was it kanji, katakana? I don't know if I'm saying these properly or not, or correct. And then kanwai. Kanwai. Yeah.
Kawaii is Hawaii.
Exactly. The culture of cuteness. I did check with my daughter, and she wouldn't say that word to describe something as cute. She knows exactly what it is. And she, recognizes things about it, but she doesn't use the word as a thing to describe cuteness.
Okay, right.
There's an answer to that. And then something we didn't mention, but we talked about, was Kaizen. So the culture of continuous improvement, and there's been books written about this over the years, going back to the 70s, I think, and we talk about it in. With Toyota, the example of where they have the production line and they're encouraged to stop the production line if they notice something that can be improved or something's wrong, and then they make small. So Kaizen is that thing of continuous improvement and making small incremental changes, rather than wholesale, complete changes.
Exactly. We talked a bit about this when Rishma said that changes they take years and there are no massive overhauls. It's always the small changes that take precedence.
And that's then Kaizen and that culture of continuous improvement and small improvements over time is, we try and adopt that. We're reading these books and we kind of, say we're going to try doing this. But isn't that just a case of we're adding a Kaizen layer on top of a culture that's not properly prepared to take it on?
Isn't that really interesting that we didn't actually use the word during the interview, because using the word is part of Western culture in describing what it is we do, whereas in Japan it's already embedded in how they work, so they don't have to mention it. It's just the way things are, which means that we're exactly that. What you're saying is we're trying to force something that isn't part of our culture onto something that then won't work as we anticipated, because people just don't think that way.
Yeah, or it's going to take a lot longer to build that culture of continuous improvement than maybe a lot of these change management programs and drives inside organizations to make us work like that are, prepared to admit.
Right. So now I'm thinking, so what are we learning here really when we're talking to Rishma is that countries are different and cultures are different. And of course, there are differences within countries. We have to acknowledge that as well. So we're not saying that everyone in all countries have a specific culture. But it doesn't mean we can adopt everything just off the bat. It does mean we can be inspired by things that others do And also that we need to recognize that when we introduce things in other countries, we need to be really respectful and understanding. And really, we would preferably should listen first before introducing something in another culture.
And this is a really, really interesting aspect. I mean, if we think about how many times over the years, like I've been involved in rollouts of like, you know, international websites and so on, a whole series of country sites for a Swedish brand, a Swedish international organization. And the way we do that is you have a design, often designed here in Sweden, and then you translate it. And it gets translated into all these different regional markets. It doesn't get redesigned. It doesn't get specifically designed for a particular market in a detailed way. At best, it is just the words that are changed. And I mean, we've talked about culture and that aspect, a few times before over the years, and how it's better to allow local organisations drive these kind of things because they know the local market best, which fits into this about culture. But it's still, I think, a lot of time just down to translating the words.
I mean, one simple example of that I've come across so many times, of course, is that a lot of the websites I've worked with have also been translated to Finnish. And the Finnish language has really long words, which means that a lot of the things that are supposed to fit in one button take several rows in that button. And so it just visually doesn't appear the same, but also just thinking that we can just translate the words and that will come across in the same way in another country. I think we're fooling ourselves all the time because that's not how language works.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really the types of insights we got from Rishma now is that language can be so different and even the letters in writing can be so different in what they convey.
Yeah, exactly. So that thing when we think about, let's take Twitter. It's an American product based on American cultural values and cultural perspectives, which has become global. It takes no prisoners when it comes to, it makes no adaptations for localities, really. It allows you to translate tweets. But again, we're back to that brutal, just this is a word, that's another word which matches it, which doesn't. So if we take Rishma's example of the bus stop button that says stop, you take the word stop in a tweet. How do you translate that to its true meaning without the context and the understanding of the culture that lies behind the words?
And some words will have so much meaning because of events that have occurred that are part of history in that particular country. So just translating the word and not actually understanding that the word can itself contain so many connotations, that itself can be disrespectful, actually.
And the cultural aspect of needing or the information density, like we mentioned, that that's something you can't just translate. You can't translate information density from one country to another. It has to be designed, has to be catered for. So we're brutally kind of like steamrolling our American English based designs across the entire world. We're not really taking that time or being prepared to take on the initial cost of understanding the impact in these other cultures and what you can do to make it work better.
Yeah. But it actually does make me think a lot about how cultures are different within countries as well. When we were talking about that form and we were joking about how we could add kittens onto a form, kawaii style, we're saying that, well, in some countries that won't work. Well, for some people in those countries it will work. But actually, then we are saying that we're always steamrolling over someone because we're deciding that this works for the most amount of people in this particular culture or country. So we're always putting aside someone that might have appreciated something that's really funny or cute because it won't work for everyone.
Oh, absolutely fascinating. Culture is never an uninteresting subject to dive into.
Very true. I know you picked up an episode for listening to next.
Yeah, it's a really, really recent one. Episode 255, which was our chat with Margot Blumstein about trustworthy and brand voice and how you'd go about contemplating, thinking about your brand actually should communicate, or should be communicate with your customers and services and so on. And it felt, even though it's recent, it felt really relevant to go back and listen to that again now after we've discussed and thought about these cultural aspects and how it differs so much. How do you deal with that then, from a brand perspective?
That's a really good one. Yeah, like that. Show notes and a full transcript can be found on uxpodcast.com if you can't get to them directly from wherever you are listening. And
click follow, subscribe, add us, or whatever you need to press or do in your culture or language or whatever it is on the interface if you aren't already doing so. And join us again for episode 260.
And if you'd like to contribute to funding UX Podcast, then visit uxpodcast.com/support. Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side. About why did the donut visit the dentist?
I don't know, James. Why did the donut visit the dentist?
To get a new filling.